Do you want to test the PowerPoint?
Yes, please.
Oh, I can do.
Please share the screen just to test.
Oh, it works. We can see it.
It works. It's okay.
Yes. You're
Malacca, Macau, and Manila.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Should we start? Nikki, Chris, is anyone from the tech team there? Can I start sharing already?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. I'm having trouble sharing because okay, now it's okay, now it's fine. Okay. Okay, so we begin already our session for this afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. This is Contacts and Continuities, 500 Years of Asian Iberian Encounters, an international conference which is delivered online, hosted by Ateneo de Manila University in collaboration with Centro de Humanidades, Universidad Nueva de Lisboa, and the National Quincentennial Committee of the Republic of the Philippines. It's now 4 p.m. local time. Good afternoon from Manila. We are also currently live streaming the conference on the conference YouTube channel and the National Quincentennial Committee Facebook page. Good afternoon to all in this Zoom and on social media. The Department of History of Ateneo de Manila is very happy to host today's panel. I'm Olivia Ann Habana, and I will be your moderator for today's panel on trade routes. Our program for today and very brief instructions. For the next 2 hours, we will have presentations from 4 speakers, followed by an open forum for about 40 minutes. We will entertain questions from 3 audiences here in the Zoom room, from the YouTube comment section, and from Facebook. Our community managers will monitor these channels and relay questions to us. So you may choose how you would like to send your questions. If you already have questions that you would like to ask, perhaps you can do so by typing them on the YouTube channel comments or on the chat if you would like. And we will try our best to get to all of them. I invite our viewers to type the questions wherever you feel most comfortable. We will gather them and read them out later. So without any further ado, let's begin our session for this afternoon. I know it's going to be a very fruitful and interesting session for all of us. Our first speaker for this afternoon is Professor Guillaume Godin. He is Associate Professor since 2011 at the University of Toulouse and is the author of many papers including El Imperio de Papel de Juan Díaz de la Calle. He also coordinated several issues and books on the role of distance in the functioning of the Spanish and Portuguese empires. He is currently writing a book on political communication between the Philippines and the rest of the empire around the years 1600. So let us all welcome Dr. Godal. I will stop sharing so that you can share.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the Ateneo de Manila University and the organizers, Nikki Cassie Cruz, Paulo Jorge de Souza Pinto, Felice Noel Rodriguez, Francis Navarro, Jonathan Chua, and Lian Habana. To be here for me, it's a great pleasure and honor. It would have been better, I suppose, to be in Philippines with all of us, but all of you. But I'm in Toulouse, France, and not in Paris, but it's the same. Don't worry. I will share my presentation up here. Is it okay? Yes. Okay. Then this paper is part of, as Lian Habana said, is part of a collective and personal research project on what distance does to the government of Iberian empires. In studying the Philippines, the idea was to take one of the territories furthest from Madrid as a limit case. The questions were, what are the reasons, the routes of circulation of people and information to and from Manila? As you know, from the 16th century onwards, circulation increased and linked places that had been separated until then. The historical work consisted in establishing the precise, often situational modalities of these connections, highlighting what each segment linked and including what did not circulate or circulated poorly, on to what degree. There were different regions of circulation, which implies obstacles, slowness, blind spots. What geographers call roughness and the anthropologist Anat Singh friction. I put you a quote of the Anat Singh book Friction about what are roads. Roads create pathways that make motion easier and more efficient, but in doing so, they limit where we go. The ease of travel they facilitate is also a structure of confinement. Friction inflects historical trajectories, enabling, excluding, and particularizing. So the question here is taking the route not only of means of connection, but also mean of confinement, as Anat Singh put it. To do so...
Excuse me, Guillaume. I think your PowerPoint is not sharing.
Ah, okay, sorry. Here, it's better.
There.
Thank you.
There, that's better. Thank you.
Here is the sentence that I read, so no problem. See, yes, the historical sources that I used to challenge this project are mainly Hispanical sources, but also Portuguese, and are talking about Hispanics from New Spain, now Mexico, people of Spain, soldiers, friars, officials, Portuguese, and members of Asian nations. For example, in 1583, an embassy of the Sultan of Ternate, Bab Ullah, led by Kashil Naike, went to Lisbon, where Philip II was. So it is a lot of people of different origins that travel on those routes. Those historical sources are the papers, mainly papers that converge to Madrid and the Council of the Indies, and different chronicles and travel logs. And there is a list. I won't read the list, but you have it on the PowerPoint. So that's it. To begin, here are the main, I will present the main routes that travelers letters, news, and goods took from the Iberian Peninsula to the Philippines and from the Philippines to the Iberian Peninsula, passing through America, the Indian Ocean, and the Middle East and the Atlantic. The first route that you know very well is the galleon route from Manila, which continued to New Spain and then into the Atlantic with the Carrera de Indias and the Atlantic system of Spanish navigation. The second route was the Portuguese route, which from Manila communicated with Macau and Malacca, what Jorge Matos will describe later, then joins Goa to embark in the naus of the Carrera da India to Lisbon. Another way to go to the peninsula was to take the Nao da Pimenta route, which opened in the 1570s, a direct journey between Malacca and Lisbon without passing through Goa. And two more routes were possible, the ancient routes linking the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. The Hormuz route in blue here, which requires following the caravans crossing the Middle East between Hormuz, Bassora, and Aleppo. The Red Sea route, it's not red here, but yellow in my PowerPoint, sorry for that, to Cairo and Alexandria. The main route for the Spanish of the Hispanics of Philippines was the Manila galleon, no? Or what they call Carrera de España when they go from Philippines to Spain, or Carrera del Poniente when they went from Spain to Philippines. It was the ordinary route that the Hispanics set up throughout the 1517s to transport goods between Manila and Acapulco, to bring in silver to pay the Chinese merchants in Manila, to transport the troops recruited in New Spain, to bring the civil servants, governors, magistrates, their family, their African slaves, an important point, to transport all the official documents, letters, papers, etc. The problem of this route was its danger, its length, especially in the Manila-Acapulco direction, and its overall timing. For example, synchronization was complicated in the Philippine archipelago, because when the ships arrived from Acapulco towards the end of June, exactly now the 15th of June, today could have been a day when the galleon of Acapulco could have just arrived in the Philippines. So at this moment, when the galleons arrived in Philippines, it was the right moment to send from Philippines to send the galleon to Acapulco. So the problem of synchronization was, do we wait for the galleon from Acapulco to send the galleon for Acapulco? The question was important because the galleon who came from Acapulco came with all the news from Mexico and Spain. So we have many times when they were just crossing here in the Estrecho de San Bernardino and the Strait of San Bernardino without taking contact. So it was a big problem of synchronization. Then a traveler who wanted to go to Madrid would therefore embark at the end of June in this galleon. If all went well, he would arrive in December in Acapulco. If he wanted to arrive in Spain the following spring, he would have to hurry to take a navio de aviso, a little boat that leaves from Veracruz at the end of December. It's a map of Mexico New Spain at those time, the ways, the pass through the caminos that a traveler had to take to get to the Veracruz. So in Acapulco, they arrived in November, December, and then they have to get to the Veracruz at only in 1 or 2 months, and most of the time they could not do this travel so fast, so they had to wait the next boat that was leaving the Veracruz in April. So you see the big problem here is there is different steps where the synchronization between different navigation was complicated. No? So they try to do it, sometimes they get it, but most of the time they could not go so fast. Yeah. The other well-known problem of the navigation in the Pacific of the Manila galleon was the danger. No, here you have a graphic that shows the boats going from Philippines to Acapulco per year. So you can see the dates. In blue, the ships that arrived in Acapulco. Okay. In red, those that were shipwrecked. In gray, those that turned back. So the main idea is that most of the time, the galleon, in this period, the Manila galleon functioned. No, it was working. But as you see, there was years without any boats leaving Philippines. Years like 87, the only boat shipwrecked. Here, an important year, 1604, one shipwrecked and another had to go back to Philippines. So there was many years without communication by the Pacific. One solution was the Indian-Portuguese route, that offered another opportunity to connect with the Philippines, with the Iberian Peninsula. This possibility was possible, sorry for that, after the union of the two crowns, the Portuguese crown and the Spanish crown, after 1580, now when Philip II is also the king of Portugal. So the connection at this point, between Manila, Macau, and Malacca was officially possible. And by this way, could travel officially. I say officially because before they did it, but it was not officially authorized. So then Macau and Malacca was another possibility to connect Philippines with Madrid. We have several examples of travelers that did this trip. The advantage, you can say that, of the Indian-Portuguese route was that the schedule was different. Portuguese ships left the Indian Ocean at the end of December, beginning of January, to arrive in Lisbon around June. And you remind that the galleon of Manila went out of Cavite in June. So it's another schedule that permits Spanish to send letters at a different moment of the year. For example, in 1603, after the revolt and massacre of the Sangleyes in October-November, letters and the messenger, Fray Diego de Guevara, were sent by the Indian route, so as not to wait for the departure of the Manila galleon in June of the following year. The revolt and massacre took place in October-November. This Fray Diego de Guevara leave Manila in December by Macau and Malacca. The problem of Fray Diego de Guevara is that arriving in Goa, there were no boats to go to Lisbon, so he took the Hormuz route. You remember the Hormuz route by the Middle East. And he arrived in Madrid, but only 3 years after leaving Manila. So taking the Macau, Malacca, Goa, Hormuz route was really not a good idea, because the people who took the galleon Manila went before him, arrived before him in Madrid. In another end, this Fray Diego de Guevara was not the only one to take those ancient routes by the Indian Ocean and the Middle East. This route was long. You have to employ a guide, often a Venetian. You had to disguise as a Muslim and to walk for months and months. But we have a different example. One well-known is of the travel of Fray Juan Pobre de Zamora in 1609. And then we have the details of this travel by a Flemish adventurer, Jacques de Coutre, who wrote this travel. He was captured in Mediterranean by Tunisian. So it's always like big adventure. The way to India or not taking the galleon of Manila was often a way to escape Manila and the control of the governor. It was an alternative way. There were all kinds of routes on the margins of the Iberian empires that benefited, for example, the Italian merchant Carletti, and we have his travel log, or Spanish adventurer who wrote on his return the account of his journey around the world, Pedro Ordóñez de Ceballos. Not to mention the Franciscan Martin Ignacio de Loyola and many unknown soldiers that traveled from Manila by the Portuguese route to Spain. Taking together these missionary, merchants, military itineraries can make one's head spin, but strictly placed in their historicity, they follow specific objectives that are supported or articulated by concrete and situated political logics. In the end, these actors did not connect the four parts of the world because their routes followed segments that do not form a whole. On the other hand, they put in communication precise places and thus modify the organization and the representation of the places and spaces they crossed and in which they acted. The Philippines and Manila in particular was an important place in this process of connectivity. Thank you very much. And sorry for my French accent. It's a bit exotical, but I did my best.
Thank you very much. And it's so interesting to see that travel was so, in a sense, very difficult, no, from the way we see travel today. So thank you very much. Let me just continue. So thank you very much, Professor Godam. We go to the second speaker for this afternoon. Our second speaker for this afternoon is Guadalupe Pinzon Rios, who is a doctor in history from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. Currently, she is a researcher at the Institute of Historical Researchers and a professor at the Faculty of Philosophy and Letters. She is also a member of the National System of Researchers of Mexico. She studies the maritime activities of New Spain during the modern period, especially along the Pacific. And this can be seen in her books, Actions and Reactions in the Ports of the South Sea and Seamen on the Novo Hispanic Coast, as well as in her numerous articles and book chapters. So let us all welcome Professor Guadalupe Pinzon Rios.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me in this event. I'm really glad to be here with you. And because of the time, I need to read my presentation. Compartir. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. New Spain and its articulating role in the exploration of the South Sea. The search for a Spanish route to the Spice Islands has been the focus of different studies. In them, the territory of New Spain has been included because it was in its coast where some explorations were prepared. But beyond seeing the territory of New Spain as a passing zone for the expansion of subsequent Castilian commercial networks, it is important to emphasize how the American territory became a nodal space for these relations. So it is necessary to emphasize how the Atlantic maritime objectives and experiences were soon adapted to the physical, economic, material, and social conditions of New Spain. And soon, these voyages established New Spain as a trading hub. The aim of this presentation is to appreciate this process, that is, to review how the search for a trans-Pacific route, in addition to responding to metropolitan interest, was also constructed as part of the interest that started in New Spain. This means the maritime practices experienced some adaptations due to the realities and possibilities of this territory. So the exploration of some coast, the establishment of shipyards, and the organization of voyages were related to the process of change in the interior of the territory and its own connections. And this was reflected in the type of materials, food, and even the conditions in which the travels were prepared. The Antilles, the first platform for the maritime advances and adaptations. It should be remembered that when the Spanish advances to the Canary Islands and later to the Antilles, they rapidly adapted to the new spaces and started to use their resources. After the Columbus voyages, the exploration and occupation of Santo Domingo, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Jamaica started, and the expansion to the continent also started, as we can see with expeditions to the Darien and to the Gulf of Mexico. Even when those expeditions were authorized on the Iberian Peninsula, their preparation, financial support, and supplies were organized from the Antilles themselves. We can read testimonies about that subject from Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who in his history of the conquest of New Spain mentioned how these expeditions had vessels repaired in the islands, and also other vessels were constructed there with local materials such as wood and fibers. These ships were also stocked up with cassave bread, which was made from some of the island roots, and bacon, since pig were the only animal that could be bought in those islands because, like Bernal said, they were newly populated. These foods were complemented with those that arrived from the Atlantic navigations, such as wine, oil, sugar, garbanzo, beans, and chickens. We can say that the Spaniards began the use of Caribbean resources and soon also implanted their own. This same process was repeated later, as we can see with the attack of Tenochtitlan. For this purpose, the Spaniards with indigenous allies constructed birgantes to carry artillery to attack the city. Those ships were made of local oak and pine trees. And after the fall of Tenochtitlan, the conquerors' advances continued toward other territories, including the western regions and their coast. After that, projects were created to continue the search for a route to Asia, and for this purpose, the process of adaptations continued. New Spain as a zone of maritime expansion. The Spanish advances were followed by the establishment of some towns because this was the legal resource to legitimize its occupation. In the case of the West advances, this occurred since 1522, and because of them, the shipyard of Zacatula was created, and the ships used in the explorations organized by Hernán Cortés were constructed there. On the other hand, Since 1524, Pedro de Alvarado advanced to Guatemala, and when he became governor, he also organized the construction of some ships there. Later, Nuño de Guzmán advanced through the west, founding New Galicia with 4 settlements designed to be connected with the ports of Chamela, Bahía Banderas, and La Navidad. We can say that as the conquering armies and indigenous allies advanced through different territories, the possibility of connecting the new settlements with the sea was considered from the beginning, and the maritime and coastal recognitions were also planned, as we can see in Cortés' letters, where he indicates his different advances discovering the South Sea. It is important to mention that the interest in discovering an interoceanic passage also continued, and Cortés himself expressed his interest in seeking the Strait of Anian to join the North Sea with the South Sea. But the difficulty of giving continuity to this project from Spain, as was evident with the Loaiza-Elcanos expedition, the monarchy was forced to consider the use of New Spain as a new place to organize those travels. And in this process, the previous experiences of adaptation and using local resources were repeated. Cortés mentioned that because they already were using corn that was like wheat, cotton that was used to make clothes, and pulque that was consumed like wine. This can be seen also with the use of local goods and fibers in the construction of boats, and its transportation dependent of local practices like the use of rivers, lakes, and the tamemes, principally because there were no draft animals yet. Soon, these new articulations also extended to the maritime spaces, as we can see when some supplies were sent between ports by maritime contact. For example, Tehuantepec and Nicaragua, as narrow areas, were used to send ship construction materials from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And after that, those materials were sent by sea to different ports. But their use was not separated from the process of change that happened in the interior, because the ports depend on their supplies, materials, and workers. As we can see, while the process of territorial expansion were taking place, the maritime projects were also being prepared along the South Sea. That is why the expeditions to the Asiatic islands should be connected to these changes, as well as the new connections developed between New Spain and Peru. This can be explained with the classification of some characteristics of the 3 principal expeditions to Asia organized from the coast of New Spain. Number 1, the expedition of Álvaro de Saavedra Cerón. It was organized by Hernán Cortés. Its official objective was to search for the expedition of García Jofre de Loaiza and Sebastián Elcano. Even when Charles V sent an order to Cortés to look for this expedition, in reality, this conqueror was already preparing it after the arrival of the Patache Santiago to Tehuantepec. This expedition was commanded by Álvaro de Saavedra Cerón, and his ships were made in Zacatula with local materials transported by land and river. There were also materials and even personnel sent from Central America and Tehuantepec by sea. And when the expedition left Zacatula, it stopped in Zihuatanejo to load supplies made of local products, such as corn and beans, as well as bacon from the pigs that started to be used there. Some products, like bread and artillery, were also sent from the Atlantic coast. We can say that this expedition shows the incipient adaptation of maritime activities on the Pacific coast of New Spain. But it is important to point out that Cerón expedition was not the only one that was planned, as we can see with the 4 trips that Cortés himself organized to California, as well as a project for a commercial network planned to Panama and Peru. It means that while the search for a route to Asia was prepared, other maritime projects were also considered and were related to the advances along the American territory. Number 2, the expedition of Ruy López de Villalobos. This expedition was organized by Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza after he had to negotiate it with Pedro de Alvarado, who was preparing an expedition to the Spice Islands from the coast of Guatemala, because in 1538, he received a capitulation to discover and populate islands and lands from the Strait of Magellan to the Maluco without making incursions into the Portuguese dominions. Mendoza and Alvarado agreed to collaborate in this trip Because of that, in 1540, the ships made in Guatemala went to the port of La Navidad to stock up with local goods like salt cured meat and bread, which shows that by that time, some European agricultural productions had already been established in the Western region. But while Alvarado's ships arrived at La Navidad, an indigenous rebellion happened in the area. Alvarado tried to collaborate in it, but suffered an accident and died. This situation forced Mendoza to entrust the expedition to Ruy López de Villalobos. The objective of this expedition, in addition to seeking the return to New Spain, was to explore and take possession of some point in the Western Islands, other than the Moluccas. The trip served to take symbolic possession of the island of Mindanao, Sarangani, and Leyte, which were baptized as Cesarea Caroli, Antonia, and Felipa. This last name was used to generalize the name of the archipelago later. Villalobos' expedition, like the Saavedra's, failed in its effort to return to New Spain, and the crew had to negotiate with Portuguese to return to Spain. But like the previous expedition, the trip was made while California was explored and even Cape Mendocino was registered. In addition, the southern travels were continued for mercantile purposes, and the remission of some products made in New Spain to Peru started. In other words, Villalobos' trip was part of the restructuration of New Spain and the beginning of the Inter-American Maritime Exchanges. Number 3, the Legazpi Urdaneta expedition. After the arrival of Philip II to the Spanish throne, an attempt was made to consolidate the Hispanic presence in the Western Islands. For these reasons, an expedition was ordered to be prepared from New Spain with the purpose of occupying the Philippines. In addition, the return route to New Spain had to be found. This trip was carefully prepared by the viceroyal authorities. From the beginning, they looked for the personnel who would lead it, which was the case of Fray Andrés de Urdaneta, and the expedition was paid by the royal treasury. So the authorities paid for the ships, the supplies, and even the salaries of the workers. They even bought slaves to work exclusively in the shipyard of La Navidad. And a change to consider was that draft animals were already being used to move materials to the ports, which should suggest that the proliferation of those animals in the viceroyalty. And again, some maritime supplies were sent from Central America by sea, and some nautical instruments were sent from Veracruz by land through the roads that were improved by that time. As is well known, this expedition began the occupation of Cebu and was successful to find the route back to New Spain. However, on Urdaneta's recommendation, the new point of articulation of the Trans-Pacific connections was Acapulco, and later the Manila galleons arrived there. It is important to mention that Urdaneta's return passed by Cape Mendocino. This shows that the previous maritime explorations from New Spain were useful to this trip, and the traffic between New Spain and Peru had increased by that time. And because of that, soon Asian merchandise were included in those trades. Therefore, we can say that the opening of the Trans-Pacific route was one of the projects that was constructed from the coast of New Spain. And even when the order to organize those trips was sent from Spain, its preparation was related to the evolution and the interest that took place in the American territories, and soon also in the Asiatic territories. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pinson Rios. That's very interesting to see that all of these interconnections between all the different maritime trade routes of the Hispanic Spanish Empire. So we shall just share my screen again. So we move on to our third speaker for this afternoon. So our third speaker for this afternoon is Angelo Cataneo, who is a permanent research fellow of the CNR, National Research Council of Italy, based at the Institute of History of Mediterranean Europe in Rome. He is also research associate of the Center for the Humanities at the New University of Lisbon, and his research revolves around two main topics. First, the cultural construction of space from the 13th to the 17th century. And second, the history of cultural encounters with a focus on missionary practices, trade mapping, linguistics in Southeast Asia from the 13th to the 17th century. He has also authored several publications and received numerous awards and postdoctoral fellowships, as well as the John Carter Brown Library, the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, and the Japan Foundation Research Fellowship. So let's welcome Dr. Angelo Cataneo.
All right. So good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to all the organizers from the Ateneo of Manila and the Centro de Humanidades, the Center for the Humanities in Lisbon, and to my former colleague and friend, Paulo Pinto. And before delivering my paper, I would like to share with you my screen. Right, and can you confirm that you see it?
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, thank you so much. So, one relevant consequence of the presence of the Namban gene and of the complex interactions that developed in the context of the encounter with the Japanese political, religious, and military elites was a new emplacement of Japan, Europe, and Southeast Asia at the global scale in both European representations and in Japanese ones, in parallel with the process of Japanese political unification brought about by Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. The topic of cartography, in particular world cartography, was one of many Namban or foreign topics treated by Japanese painters on the broad surfaces of folding screens, or byobu, as the one that you see displayed in the PowerPoint, depicted probably the first or one of the first Japanese world map screens, which are very famous, and they usually combine a representation of the world with a depiction of Japan. Today, instead, I would like to call your attention to a different kind of document that is very much connected to the topic of this huge conference. I'm talking about a map designed by Japanese painters around 1596 and currently held at the Kochi Prefectural Library in the city of Kochi in Japan. This map is an extraordinary handwritten document drawn by some Japanese officers following the 1596 shipwreck of the San Felipe galleon on the southern shores of the island of Shikoku in Japan. The galleon had ran aground, pushed by a typhoon, as it sailed from the Philippines to the northeast in search of the so-called black current, or kuroshio in Japanese, to return to Mexico through the so-called tornaviaje. The map, drawn by the Japanese officers following the interrogation of the Spaniards and the confiscation of the cargo, is oriented to the south and places Japan and Luzon, the Philippines, at the center of a complex system of sea routes between the coast of China, Siam, today's Vietnam, and Luzon, the Philippines, to the west, and the American continent, and even the Iberian and African coast to the east, on the left side of the screen. And the map is oriented to the south. So you have China on the right, Japan on the south, Luzon in the upper part. In the middle, you have America, and on the left side, you have Europe and Africa. And at the center, there is Japan and the Philippines. The analysis and transcription of this document, developed by the author together with Professor Sagiyama Ikuko from the University of Florence, highlights that the world is observed and represented from Japan and the Philippines, placed at the center of a system of sea routes that encompasses the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans from a global maritime perspective. In synthesis, this is the historical context that explains the origin of the map. Following the shipwreck in October 1596 of the galleon San Felipe off the coast of Urado on Shikoku Island, one of the three main islands of the Japanese archipelago, south of the island of Honshu, a map was drawn by some Japanese officers based on geographical information communicated to them by the Spaniards. This is a document of exceptional importance for understanding the repositioning of both Japan and the Philippines, carried out by the Japanese themselves within the framework of the Iberian transcontinental routes. In fact, the map allows us to grasp the reception in Japan of the sea route that for the first time linked the Philippines and the Japanese and the Chinese and Indo-Chinese coast with the American continent, and indirectly with the Iberian coast, having Japan and Southeast Asia in general as an observation point, placed at the center of the representation and written in Japanese. After identifying and numbering the 59 textual units of the map, we proceeded to their original textual transcription, as you can see on the image that I am displaying, and when possible, identification. At the present stage of our research, all textual units have been transcribed, and about half of them have been romanized and identified. I would like to call your attention on this longer cartouche, which details and explains the origin of the map. And I quote, an unmanned ship in the 5th year of the Bunroku era, so 1596, 9 months and 28 days, so around October 19th, 1596, arrived in Urado Bay. Taiko Hideyoshi, so the Taiko, the retired regent, that is Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the most powerful military general in Japan at that time, sent a cargo inspector named Masuda Nagamori. Then the Namban people, so the Spaniards, brought this map when they went to Kyoto, and therefore one copy was made, and another one is made here. So this is a copy of an original map designed from an original Spanish map. The map is therefore the result of the collaboration between Spaniards and Japanese, who not only translated it from a linguistic point of view, but also made a cultural translation, recentering the map on Japan and the Philippines. It is precisely this work of cultural translation that makes this document particularly interesting. The central element of the entire representation is made of a system of sea routes drawn in red ink. You can easily recognize them. These are original routes written as every very evident line, which from the Philippines, Luzon, radiate west towards Macau, south towards Japan, passing through the Ryukyu Islands. To the east, they head towards the American continent, and then towards Portugal and the Iberian Peninsula. It is very much essential to highlight that the routes between the Philippines and the center of the American continent distinguish, as you can easily see, two routes most likely to be identified with the two distinct routes, sea routes, that went from Acapulco to Manila, and the opposite one, which involved a route located north, skirting the coast of Japan to meet the Kuroshio, the so-called Black Current. In schematic form, the Kochi map summarizes and integrates two different perspectives. On the one hand, the Spanish view on the world or of the world from the Philippines to the Iberian Peninsula, crossing the American continent. But on the other hand, it highlights the repositioning of Japan and of Southeast Asia, in particular the Philippines, at the center of these huge marine spaces through a Japanese reinterpretation mediated by the Spanish of the Iberian transoceanic routes, rooted in the pioneering navigations of Magellan, Magallanes, Elcano, Legazpi, and Urdaneta, to name the main navigators and captains involved in the Trans-Pacific Sea journey. In conclusion, the Kochi map, so this map, highlight the juxtaposition as well as integration through visuality and mapping of different systems of knowledge within integrated and synoptic representation of the world. By tracing the source of the map and the context of origin, they can help us in providing answer to the question, where is the place of Japan? But also, where is the place of Luzon, of the Philippines, in the world around 1600, 1650? And at the same time, where is the place of Europe when perceived from the Philippines and Japan? So this analysis highlights that linear Eurocentric models of circulation of knowledge, people, and ideas, such as West-East linear relationship, implicitly or silently assumed by many scholarly works. So you have a focus, Iberia, Portugal, and Spain, and then you have the rest of the world. So the focus is on Europe and the rest of the world. I think that here we have a reversed perspective. We can see a different agency in connection with Iberian perspectives, but a reversed one, which places at the center Southeast Asia and look at the world from Southeast Asian through a Japanese reinterpretation of the connection. In Japan, while this map was depicted, there were other representations detailing the sea route. This is a part of the byobu I first display at the beginning of my presentation. And you can see in the red, as a red line, a sea route from Japan to Malacca and then Goa. But if you look at the bottom, you can see also the Trans-Pacific route as interpreted. And if you look at in another Japanese document held at the Idemitsu Museum of Art, you can see it's a very spectacular and very flamboyant representation. You can probably see the two ships crossing the Pacific, again, from a Japanese perspective. In this context, and also referring to the research that I have been developing with a colleague of mine, Professor Alessandra Curvelo from Lisbon, I will report a statement by a very famous Portuguese Jesuit active in Japan around 1600, João Rodrigues. Rodrigues was reflecting on the position of Japan. And I quote, he wrote, "The islands of Japan, but I may add, the Philippines island as well, are located in the ocean between the two continents and great parts of the world, Asia, New Spain, and America, or New World. And it looks as if nature has placed it there in the middle, purposely." Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Cataneo.
Thank you.
So we go now to the last speaker for this afternoon. Jorge Semedo de Matos is a Navy officer with the grade of commander, a professor at the Portuguese Naval Academy, and associated professor in the School of Arts and Humanities of the University of Lisbon, Department of History. He is a member emeritus of the Naval Academy and associated member of the Portuguese Academy of History. He authored the book Portuguese Rutters and Roots of the Far East, for which he received the prize Almirante Sarmento Rodrigues in the year 2017. He has also produced more than 100 articles and book chapters, mostly on modern history, history of nautical science, and naval history. So let's welcome Professor Semedo de Matos.
Good morning for all my colleagues, and I will thank you. I'll thank you all the organizers. And I apologize for presenting my lecture in Portuguese, but I did not. It's not easy. My English is not so fluent to present it in English. I hope that the images are expressive, and at the end, I will try to complement them with some explanations in English or perhaps in Spanish it will be necessary. I'm going to share my.
Yes. Please go ahead.
It's okay, I suppose.
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay. Malacca, Macau, and Manila on Portuguese maritime routes from the far east, 16th and 17th centuries, was the title of my presentation. A rivalidade expansionista ibérica teve as suas expressões no Oceano Atlântico, a quando das primeiras viagens marítimas do século XV, com disputas de soberania sobre terras além-mar. Foram sendo resolvidas com a assinatura de tratados políticos, como aconteceu com o Tratado de Alcáçovas-Toledo, 1479-80, e sobretudo com o Tratado de Tordesilhas, assinado em 1494. Pressupunha este último tratado a divisão do espaço atlântico em duas partes, separadas por uma raia ou linha direita de polo a polo, a saber, do polo ártico ao polo antártico, que é de norte a sul, a qual raia ou linha e sinal se tenha de dar e dê direita como dito é, a 370 léguas das ilhas de Cabo Verde em direção à parte do poente. Leitura do texto do tratado. Quer isto dizer que esta linha direita de polo a polo era um semimeridiano e que o contexto do próprio tratado não previa qualquer divisão no outro lado do mundo. Não pensaram nisso, digo eu, mas a questão a colocar seria, depois da chegada dos portugueses a Malaca, em 1411, da viagem de Fernão de Magalhães, iniciada em 1519. Aliás, como sabemos, essa viagem é uma consequência deste pressuposto de uma divisão oriental de influências no prolongamento do semimeridiano, cuja posição geográfica no Oriente era muito difícil de definir com os meios e instrumentos que então dispunham. Sem querer alargar-me sobre este assunto, a disputa na altura era o domínio das Ilhas Molucas, na convicção de que a produção do cravo constituía uma riqueza que valia bem todos os esforços e disputas. Os portugueses chegaram a essas longínquas ilhas em 1512 e em 1521 Magalhães chegava ao arquipélago de São Lázaro, que chamou de São Lázaro, hoje Filipinas, agravando uma tensão que se prolongaria até ao final do século XVI, só parcialmente resolvida com novos tratados e acordos. Entretanto, a par da busca das especiarias ditas ricas, os portugueses de Malaca contactaram a China logo em 1513, encetando uma relação comercial de grande lucro que passaria por diversas fases, culminando na concessão do estabelecimento em Macau em 1557. O comércio com a China, isto complementar apenas, exato. O comércio com a China, nesta primeira fase, assentava na venda de pimenta adquirida nas ilhas de Sumatra e Java, para ser trocada na costa chinesa por sedas, porcelanas e outras mercadorias de grande valor comercial. Devo salientar, contudo, que estas viagens marítimas desenvolveram-se com recurso a mercadores privados, navegando geralmente em juncos e outras embarcações de concessão local, absorvendo e adotando as regras do comércio da região. Um comércio virado essencialmente para a China, consumidora insaciável. Sucede, todavia, que as viagens espanholas para o Extremo Oriente tiveram continuidade após a tentativa de Magalhães, como já foi referido, tinham, contudo, uma enorme dificuldade de regresso à Nova Espanha pelo Oceano Pacífico, mas resolveram-na em 1565 com Andrés de Urdaneta. Como é sabido, este sucesso decorre na sequência da expedição de López Legazpi, que permaneceu nas Filipinas e fundou a colónia espanhola, que virá a ter a sua sede em Manila, conquistada em 1571. Macau, 1557, e Manila, em 1571. Portugueses e espanhóis estão preparados para continuar a disputa das especiarias, mas descobrindo antes, ambos, o que eram os negócios da China, onde entrava agora o ouro e a prata americana, transportado através do Pacífico. Abria-se assim um novo conflito, cujos detalhes não vou explorar, até porque não teria tempo para isso, complementando apenas com o facto de ter evoluído do confronto inicial para a colaboração estreita no interesse comum do comércio com a China. Uma aliança que ganhou forma mais sólida ainda quando chegaram ao Oriente os navios holandeses e ingleses, rivais no comércio e inimigos, dissidentes no cristianismo, e é nestas circunstâncias que nasce uma rede de rotas marítimas que unem Malaca, Macau e Manila, com uma expressão muito significativa na primeira metade do século XVII, mesmo depois da aclamação em Lisboa de Dom João IV, Duque de Bragança, e, portanto, da secessão de Portugal em relação à coroa espanhola e da guerra entre os dois reinos ibéricos, os comerciantes do Extremo Oriente foram encontrando forma de continuar os seus negócios com expedientes particularmente engenhosos. Antes de entrar nas rotas propriamente ditas, que são a razão de ser desta apresentação, direi que este triângulo de comércio marítimo só foi possível, e reforço, porque o mundo ibérico oriental, português e espanhol, estava suficientemente distante dos poderes centrais para iludir e atuar à revelia das diretivas que eram produzidas na Europa. A leste de Malaca e até aos limites das Filipinas, vivia-se no mundo dos juncos, expressão de uma pessoa, minha amiga, onde o poder del rei era interpretado, respeitado ou ignorado, conforme os interesses e entendimentos locais. Mas entremos então nas rotas entre Macau, Manila e Malaca, tal como as encontro descritas em roteiros portugueses e alguns espanhóis, decalcadas das rotas que anteriormente eram percorridas por malaios, javaneses, bornéus, léquios e outros pilotos do Oriente. Os nossos estudos assentaram num conjunto de roteiros, em alguns casos, já poucos, publicados, mas sobretudo em coleções dos séculos XVII, que são pertença de bibliotecas privadas, agora transcritos na minha tese e livro, Roteiros e Rotas Portuguesas no Oriente, e que foi referida no princípio na apresentação. Roteiros e Rotas Portuguesas no Oriente, nos séculos XVI e XVII. Devo acrescentar aos textos aí transcritos a existência do manuscrito 3174 da Biblioteca Nacional de Espanha, com alguns roteiros desta região e que referirei a seu tempo. Devia sair-se de Macau, que está aqui, em direção a Manila, entre meados de novembro e todo o mês de dezembro, aproveitando a monção de nordeste, monção onde os ventos sopram de nordeste, favoráveis à navegação para o sul. Adverte-se, contudo, que outros textos dizem poder fazer-se a viagem em qualquer altura do ano, o que acontece devido às brisas que sempre sopram nas imediações das grandes massas continentais, ou mesmo de ilhas montanhosas. Os navios portugueses preferiam sair de Malaca pelo canal, de Macau, pelo canal que corre para o oeste e sair depois desta ilha, Jaiquindau, na altura chamada pelos portugueses Ilha da Montanha. Suponho que preferiam este caminho pelo aproveitamento dessas mesmas brisas e ventos locais que sopram entre as ilhas e para evitarem, sobretudo, as ilhas dos Ladrões, que estavam na boca do Rio de Cantão. Seguiam a sueste, com resguardo aos baixos da Prata, que estão aqui, que estavam em 20 graus e meio largos, que são, na realidade, 20 graus e 40 minutos norte. Assim fez o piloto Francisco Pires, em viagem de 1636, navegando até que se encontrasse nos 16 graus e meio, onde foi à procura da terra de Lução, que encontrou por perto do cabo Bolinau, da Baía Lingayen. Querendo seguir para Manila, navegar-se-ia a uma légua da costa, passando por Las Dos Hermanas, são duas ilhas, a maior e a menor, a Baía de Mansiloc, que é logo a seguir, as Ilhas dos Caponas, contornando depois a terra de Bantam, para entrar em Manila. Adiante vou falar desta entrada, que é um pouco complexa. O regresso fazia-se percorrendo a costa de sul para norte, até ao cabo Bugiador, a uma légua também da costa, tomando depois o rumo oeste-noroeste, com grande vigia aos baixos da Prata, até encontrar a Ilha do Leme, suponho que é mais ocidental do grupo do Leme, onde se encontra, no texto, o buqueirão para entrar em Macau. E eu suponho tratar-se do canal, daquilo que hoje é o canal ocidental, que é aqui. Malaca a Manila, entre o final do século XVI e 2 ou 3 décadas do século XVII, Manila teve também comércio com Malaca. À semelhança de Macau, era sempre baseado na sua riqueza em prata, que vinha da América, trocando-a por especiarias, tecidos de algodão e outros produtos que vinham da Índia, do sul, do arquipélago ou mesmo da China. Para fazer esta viagem deviam os navios sair de Malaca até ao final de maio, com a monção de sudoeste e antes dos tufões, navegando pelo canal de Singapura até à Pedra Branca, que é uma pedra que marca o fim do canal de Singapura, onde tomavam o caminho do norte, tal como na viagem que mostrei há pouco para a China. O grande problema na zona sul do mar do Vietnã, ou Filipinas, ou não, os chineses chamam-lhe Mar da China do Sul, mas é, na realidade, Mar do Vietnã ou Mar das Filipinas, era a miríade de baixos de origem corealífera, ou com origem na grande atividade vulcânica submarina. De forma que a viagem era feita até às ilhas de Pulau Tioman, esta ilha que aqui está, e a partir daí, seguindo rotas muito rigorosas e precisas, entre latitudes que se podiam determinar com alguma facilidade. Assim, a partir de Pulau Tioman, devia tomar-se o rumo nordeste com quarta do norte, até alcançar os 5,5 graus de latitude norte. Nesse local, devia guinar-se um pouco para estibordo ou para nordeste, starboard ou northeast, seguindo com muita atenção ao rumo nordeste até cerca de 12 graus norte. Aqui era possível então tomar o rumo leste-nordeste até avistar as ilhas de Mindoro ou Luban. Estava a chegar-se a Manila, de cuja entrada eu falarei à parte. Outra rota era possível para fazer a viagem de Malaca a Manila, era pela ilha de Bornéu, parecendo-me que seria usada quando se saía de Malaca depois de junho, ou fora de tempo. Ela não aparece muito nas coleções de roteiros com a mesma frequência, mas está no tal manuscrito que falei há pouco, 3174, da Biblioteca Nacional de Espanha, e está em língua castelhana. Atravessava-se da Pedra Branca para Bornéu, seguindo a sua costa noroeste até à extremidade norte da ilha, seguindo depois a leste de Palawan até Mindoro. A entrada em Manila. Quem vinha de Malaca tinha duas opções para entrar em Manila, que as escolheria de acordo com o vento. Poderia ir. Desculpem. A Bahia apresentava algumas dificuldades, não só pelas quantidades de baixos que tem, como pelas voltas do vento próprias dos espaços apertados, com montanhas por perto, onde o vento é canalizado de formas caprichosas. Tem dois canais de entrada, Manila, o norte e o sul, ao tempo chamados Boca Chica, o norte, e Boca Grande, o pequeno, tendo a separá-los a Ilha do Corregedor e a Ilha do Cavalo. Quem vinha do norte fazia esta viagem que está aqui, indicada, tentava entrar esse canal entre o Recife de La Monja e Mariveles, desde que o vento lhe servisse. Com vento contrário, previnem os roteiros, o que era vulgar, deveria continuar o caminho para sul, até à Ilha de Fortuna, virando então para norte para entrar pelo canal sul, pela Boca Grande, deixando o Recife El Fraile, La Monja El Fraile, que está ali, a estibordo. Quem vinha de Malaca tinha também duas opções, que escolheria de acordo com o vento. Poderia ir até ao ilhéu La Monja, para entrar pela rota norte, mas poderia optar pelo canal sul, sendo que para isso era melhor passar entre as ilhas de Mindoro e Luban, porque tudo é limpo, dizem os roteiros, e fazer a abordagem, como disse há pouco. Dentro da grande baía de Manila, o objetivo era fundear abrigado na baía de Cavite, ou havia uma outra possibilidade, de forma que era junto ao postigo de Santa Luzia, um pouco mais a norte. De forma que o rumo poderia ser de leste-nordeste ou nordeste, para quem entrava pelo canal norte, tendo atenção o perigo de evitar os baixos de São Nicolás, que estão ali assinalados. A rota sul passava também, portanto, a norte do Fraile, e ia contornar os baixos de São Nicolás. Estas rotas assim descritas parecem-nos uma coisa natural e simples, e termino, mas estas descrições dos roteiros são o espelho de uma tarefa complicada e de pressão constante, com todas as dificuldades e perigos que a viagem tem. Pouco tem a ver com a lógica da navegação de hoje. revelando uma mentalidade própria e um raciocínio de permanente alerta para evitar os perigos e conduzir o navio a bom porto. Muito obrigado. Thanks very much. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much. With your permission, Professor, I would like to read briefly the abstract because as requested by the audience on social media. So the abstract, I will read your abstract briefly in English. I will read it.
You will read or you want that I read?
No, I will just read very brief because it's only for social media purposes. For the people watching on YouTube. So
okay.
Anyway, thank you. Here's the abstract. In 1511, the Portuguese conquered the city of Malacca, settled the old trading post and the port where several sea routes were found. From that day, they sought to enter all these shipping routes and reach the same commodities, learning to sail with the region's pilots. They realized the importance of trade with China, and step by step, they learned to deal with the empire, obtaining in 1557 a special concession to settle in Macau. In 1571, Lopez Legazpi consolidated the Spanish presence in Manila, and a few years later, there was a regular maritime connection between the Philippines and New Spain, crossing the Pacific Ocean. At the turn of the century, Malacca, Macau, and Manila became the cornerstones of trade network routes involving Portuguese, Spanish, and some other local merchants. So thank you very much again, Professor Jorge Matos.
Thank you very much.
We will now be going to our open forum. So we can start with any questions from the Zoom room. If you would like, please raise your hand virtually, and I will call on you. Oops, I cannot resize. Just a moment. Any questions for any of the panel members from the Zoom room? If not, may I start with a question here? It says here, oh, sorry, before I start with the questions, I'd like to thank all of the panelists again who gave really new and refreshing perspectives and viewpoints on the often narrow view we have of travel and the maritime world of the 16th to the 18th century. So a question for anyone who would like to address it. What are the implications of these very different maritime routes and the interconnections on human geography and any commercial effects on the colonies? So I suppose on population, movement, migration, and on the economy, trade of the colonies.
You're asking for?
Any of the panel who would want to address that?
I can say something.
Okay.
The colony of Macau, was quite we can find a lot of Portuguese and a big influence of Portuguese language that became to the 20th century. In Philippines, we can find a lot of Portuguese too, but in 1640 or 42, when the news about the new crown, the new king of Portugal arrived at the Far East, I suppose that the Portuguese get out of Philippines. I don't know. We know the story of an interesting Portuguese called Vieira de Figueiredo, that organized after that a Portuguese colony in the south, a big Portuguese colony in the south in Macassar, and after that in the Flores Islands.
Islands, Indonesia.
It was very interesting, the action of that deaf man. I don't know if we can find a big influence of Portuguese in Philippines. In Malacca, I suppose that we can find some people talking quite Portuguese in Malacca today. We can find a little group of Portuguese that can speak, a little group of Malayans that can speak a kind of Creole Portuguese. They preserve that as a tradition, and they try to maintain that traditions and contact periodically with Lisbon, with Portugal. It is very interesting to observe that community that became from a Christian community in 16th and 17th century, before the Dutch conquest, I suppose. That's,
Yes.
I don't know, that's all I...
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
After I have a question to Guadalupe too, if it is possible, but I can wait.
Okay, so we'll start first with Paulo Pinto, and then Guillaume, and then back to you, Professor Jorge Matos. Yes, Paulo.
Well, thank you. I would like to put a question to Angelo about the map. It's a very simple question regarding the image. Well, as we know, the Portuguese were known under the name of Nambanjin, barbarians of the south. But as far as I remember from the map that you showed, the Portuguese were Nambanjin from the south because they came from Malacca. That was, it's actually in the south. But in the map that you've shown, the Portuguese do not come from Malacca, but from Macau. Can you explain exactly if there was a perception of the South, Malacca being in the south and Macau not being exactly in the south? Is there some sort of a contradiction between this general idea and the elements present in the map?
Thank you. I have not, in fact, thought from this perspective. In fact, but no doubt, the European Catholic that went to Japan were referred to as Nambanji, so barbarians from the south. And in fact, they were from the south because they entered Japan from the Kyushu, which is in the south. So, and of course, from Malacca and also Macau, which are placed to the south of Japan. So this is not under discussion, but it's quite interesting that the map they drawn, transforming, as they wrote, a Spanish map or a Spanish document or narration, how to say, reverse the perspective. What can we think about this transformation of the cardinal points of the direction? We can imagine that, in fact, the entire movement as represented in the map, so the map deals very much with movement and sea routes, which are the very center of the maps. All the rest, the islands, even the continents, are a result of the connecting lines the red connecting lines. Well, all this movement originates from the Philippines. So the idea is Japan is placed at the center with respect to a kind of engine, a starting point that develops from the Philippines. That, so to speak, if you look at them from Japan, are placed in the upper part, because they reached from, let's say, they reached Japan, the Shikoku Island or the coast of Urado, coming from above, going to the south. I'm sorry, from the south going to the north. But thanks, Paolo, for, so I don't have a definitive answer. The Nambanjins are Nambanjins, but when you look at them from the point of arrival, from the Philippines, this perspective is reversed. And because the very movement originates from above Japan and then spreads globally. I don't know, but this is a point I will bear in mind while developing the, I mean, this is a kind of contradiction, in fact, which I will bear in mind while continuing the analysis of this document. So thank you so much for highlighting it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Guillaume?
Just a little a few words about the first question, but the migration. It's well known that the galleon, Manila galleon, was the way through the Hispanics from Mexico came to Manila and Philippines in general. What we have to know, I think, it's that there were very few Hispanics in the Philippines all along the 17th century because the level of mortality was very high, and there were a tremendous turnover of people through the galleon. No, they were every year like 100 or 200 soldiers from Mexico came to Manila. So they were a very, I think, a very strange social life in Manila, for example, because there were very few families, old families of Manila, because of this high mortality, and the link with social link with Mexico was very, very important. It was the same people. They were living in Manila and Mexico and traveling, but there is other phenomenon like I don't know, you say in English, mestizaje, ¿cómo se dice, Paolo? Mestizaje?
Mestizaje.
Mix between Philippines population or included Chinese and so on. So the galleon was the link for the Spanish, but also for other type of people. I mentioned the African slave who came from mostly from America, no, and they lived in Manila, no. So there is a complexity too. And I have also a question, if I may, for Angelo. I can. Yeah. It was about if you know if you have ideas of the sources of the Japanese map, because I was thinking of the book, one of the first published book in Manila, the Juan Cobos in Chinese, Apology for the True Religion, who include a map, as you know, in Chinese. So, and I didn't have time to see exactly, but it reminded me the map. Thank you.
Well, it's to be honest, I'm familiar with Cobo's work and through, in fact, Cervera Jimenez's work. So I have never analyzed the work myself directly. I'm familiar with historiography. And to be honest, I have never made this connection I have here on the screen while I'm talking to you the image of the map, but it's not simple to, at least for me, to look at it as a possible source. But I will, I mean, given the very strict coincidence of time, because we are talking about 1593, as you correctly pointed out, and here we are about just a few years later. So I mean, the case is at least chronologically coherent. And so thank you for calling my attention again to the existence of this work that was printed of course, in the Philippines, and was meant to have a circulation in China. So thanks for this could be a research path I could develop further. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we have a question from Professor Matos for Dr. Pinson Rios.
To
Guadalupe.
Guadalupe, buenos dias. The question is, can we consider that in New Spain we have quite two organizations? One part is organized to the traffic and to the commerce of the Pacific and the Manila galleon, and the other organization to the Mar del Sur, that to control and traffic with the countries and the coasts of South America. And Mar del Sur and Pacific Ocean are two different things in that times. Is it possible?
In the documentation is the same. In fact, it's like a synonymous, South Sea and Pacific.
Yes.
But there are different routes in this ocean, because the relation between Peru, Chile, Central America, and New Spain became very important. And because of that, for example, one of the principal consumers of Asiatic merchandise was Peru, even when the commercial relation was prohibited since the 17th century. But that means that there are a lot of routes, a lot of relations, legal and illegal, locals or transoceanic, that occur in the ocean. Like you mentioned, yes, in the other side, there are a lot of routes, a lot of even the local resources, local ships, that we need to know more about that. But more or less the idea is South Sea is the Pacific in that period. After, more or less in the 19th century, the name of South Sea changed to the
Pacific.
To another, became different, but in the modern period is the same, more or less.
Yes, of course. Yes, it's a synonym, but it seems that that was two different worlds: Mar del Sur, a Pacific Ocean. I don't know exactly.
Maybe it sounds different because there were different articulations.
Different organization. It's one thing is to commerce with South America, Peru, and Chile, and another thing, completely different, is to traffic and commerce with Manila. There are two different organizations for two different activities, commercial activities. That was my question. I don't know.
Yeah, but there were different routes, but in fact they were really connected, because
yes, of course connected, because the silver comes from the south. I'm sorry.
And even from Peru and even from Mexico. But for example, from my perspective, the center of that networks were America, for example, because of the silver. And we can see the connections between the Atlantic, between the Pacific, but it is really important to review the connections, inter-American connections, because most of the time we just think about the connections from Spain and from Portugal, between America and between Macau, for example, but we need to include all kind of relations that happen, for example, in the case of America, because even where the routes were different, the relation in a big picture have a lot in common, and all that kind of relations, or mostly, have a connection in Acapulco, for example, and because of that connection with Philippines. So we need to check the difference. For that, I think it's very important to recapitulate in the perspective of the polycentrism, because we need to check the different articulations and how they connect in a big picture. And because of that, maybe I can say something about the first questions. About the migration also, like Guillaume said, it's also important to check the cultural movement, the practices, the I don't know, the cultural, that means the use of some things, the objects, and even the names. For example, as I have the idea, in Philippines use some Nahuatlisms, I don't know, words in Nahuatl. Like in Mexico, we use some words in Tagalog, for example, no? But also maybe it's important to check words in I don't know, words very representative from Peru, for example, even when the connections, direct connections were prohibited since the 16th century, we need to check how that those connections happened, and we can follow because these kind of objects and words and practices, etc. That's all.
Thank you very much. I'll just go to some questions on our other channels, on the YouTube channel, for example. The galleon trade. So this is for, I think, perhaps anyone, maybe Guillaume or Angelo. The fastest route to Iberia, so between the galleon trade route, the Portuguese route over Ormuz, and the route past the Cape of Good Hope, which one was the fastest?
No one. No, they were. I think they were alternatives. No, so I'm talking on the Hispanic perspective. I'm sorry about that, but for the Spaniards in Manila, they were alternatives. So it depended when they had to send the news or someone, and they used to, the normal ordinary route was the Pacific, the Pacific route. It was, and I think it was, we are not, we don't share with those people of the 16th and 17th century the same, how you said, the same sensation and sensitivity with times. I think they had another representation of time, of risk. They knew that sometimes it was, they took in account the risk of the shipwreck, etc. So they knew that they were fastest way, but they knew also that it was risky, or so they were not. And I something that I did not mention is that they send letters in the both from the both routes. No, they send letters, the same letter via the Pacific, the galleon, and via the Portuguese route. So the idea was not to go fast, but to send the information, to secure the information. I think.
I can say something, if it is possible, about that.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. We have a question for Guadalupe from Father Tony De Castro. Would you have any information about the galleon trade linking Manila and Peru directly? This was disallowed by the Spanish crown at some point in order to protect the Spanish silk industry, showing there that Chinese silk was perceived as a threat to the viability of Spanish silk.
I can answer, but I think Professor Matos wants to ask something. I'm not sure. Or it's better that I answer?
Maybe please answer. Professor Matos will get back to you right after the answer.
As I have in the studies, they mentioned that the Peru tried to connect with Manila directly, but it was forbidden from the 16th century, in the end of 16th century, because Peru was very important viceroyalty with the principal production of silver. So Spain tried to protect that that production, and that Peru sent this silver only to the Atlantic route to Spain, and because of that, they tried to close the connection with Philippines, and tried that the silver didn't arrive to China, for example. And because of that, Acapulco, because it was also the area when the navigation started, became the only nodal to that Trans-Pacific route. But in some occasions, some Manila galleons lose the way and finish, for example, in Central America. But in those cases, the result was I don't know, the authorities know about the irregularities. For example, a shipwreck represent a failure, but also let's see the contrabands, for example. So the Peruvians didn't need the connection connection with Manila, because they have a lot of trades with Acapulco, mostly illegal since the 17th century. So the short answer is the Peruvian tried to connect with Manila, but was forbidden. And because of that, they have a lot of trade with Acapulco and also Central America. Central America was really important in the connections between New Spain and Peru. And because of that, they started the direct connection until the 18th century with the Company of Philippines. But in the end of the 18th century, the 18th century.
Thank you, Professor Guadalupe. Professor Matos, did you want to add or say something?
Yes, it's about how fast is the voyage for one or from one or other way.
Okay, yeah. So which one was the fast one?
I think the problem was not a technical or nautical problem, but a political problem. The problem of controlling the movement of custom of products that comes from Far East. The Far East, I mean Macau, Malacca, or Manila, were very distant from Europe. Yes. And became a different world, not exactly controlled as we can imagine. The control of the king, of the control of the crown in Europe. You understand? It's something between the illegal and the respect, the solidarity, the I mean, a religious solidarity, of course, but without an effective control by the crown. Did you understood the situation? And a lot of things that happened the Far East were not considered or controlled by Europe. And the voyage from Manila or from Macau to Lisbon had a lot of problems in the way. The first problem was Malacca, the second was India, and after that the voyage from the Cape Road. But sobretudo, I don't know. It was clear that my explication. I'm sorry. It's a little bit confusing.
It's okay. Okay, I have a question.
Is that the control? The Europe did not control it. I'm sorry. Just a moment. I mean that the control of the king or the orders that became from Madrid or from Lisbon to the Far East sometimes were respected, sometimes were different, have a special interpretation, and sometimes were ignored, completely ignored. That's a different world. That the contacts with Lisbon or Spain or Madrid were not a good thing for the locals, or for the Portuguese or Spaniards that live there. You understand? No. I'm sorry?
Yes.
We understand. Thank
We
you.
understand. Thank you. So I have there are some comments from in the YouTube site. They are thanking Professor Godan for providing your source. Thank you. So they're also asking Professor Angelo if you have a publication of the Japanese map that they can access, that can be accessed. That's one thing they're requesting. And then there is a question for you as well. It's here for the Japanese. Did they differentiate between the Portuguese or Spanish? And how did this shape the making and representation of the maps in Japan?
Could you repeat, please, the last part of your question? Thank you.
Sure. How did this shape the making or representation of maps in Japan?
It's a huge question. Well, first part, the logistical part. Yes, I have already published an introductory essay on this map. Within an essay dealing with, I call it encounters or Magellan for all, and then the reception in Japan of the Trans-Pacific routes. Mm-hmm. And it is published in Italian.
Okay.
But if I don't know if there is available my my email address, but the people who are interested in it could write to me and I will send to them privately the essay, which is part of an edited volume, so I cannot distribute it.
Yes, we understand.
Randomly, but on a private basis I can, and I look forward to it.
Thank you. So we will ask people to message you privately. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. To my email address, and they will easily find me, and I will send my pleasure the essay.
Thank you.
Second, thank you. Second part of first part of the question: do they differentiate? Do they make distinctions? No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Although I think that these routes connected all sorts of places. I think both the Portuguese and the Spanish world are there integrated as they were, historically speaking, at the time the map was designed. It's the time of the union of the two crowns, as we all remember. Maybe there is one point of reflection. If I cannot display the map now, or I can, if you wish. Well, let me try to do it just for 1 second. If I have it open again, well, I don't see it, sorry. Probably I closed the PowerPoint. Anyway.
Okay, never mind.
On the left margin, there is, as you probably remember, let's say the Europe and Africa. And you can distinguish the Iberian Peninsula. Well, let me try to display. Just give me 5 seconds, please. I will look for the PowerPoint again. It's a matter of just a few seconds. All right. Here we are. Now let's go back to the Zoom. And now let's try to share the screen. Here it goes. And now let me just try to move it up to place it here. Can you see it or not?
Yes, yes, we can see.
Yes,
we can see your PowerPoint.
So if you look at here, all right, look at the left part of the screen. And there is Higashi, which means east. And then beside, there is written the number 4, Miyako. What does it mean, Miyako? It means capital. So if you name Kyoto, you do not call it Kyoto in the 16th century. You call it Miyako. It means it's the capital. So Madrid is there, but it's not named Madrid. It's named as capital, the capital. So if we assume this, that Madrid is the capital, because it's not there explicitly, but referred to as the capital, somehow you have a strong Spanish accent in the map, so to speak. So a kind of Spanish lore in the map, if we assume this. But if you look in the upper part, there is a number 2, which is somehow on the allegedly the African continent. You see Portugal no Cuni. So I think the two perspectives are in fact integrated. And I don't remember the last part of the question, but you may indulge me either in repeating it or we just close it here.
Okay. I think Dr. Greg Bankoff, you raised your hand. You have a question. Greg?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for wonderful presentations. I enjoyed them all. I was thinking a little bit more about the idea. I mean, we're talking about Spanish ships and we're talking about Portuguese ships and routes, but could you say anything a bit more about the ethnicity of the crews that were on them? Because I'm going back to what Dr. Guadalupe Pinzon Rios was talking about, adaptation and things like that, and use of materials. But what about people? Who were on these ships, actually?
Thank you for the question. in the beginning, the expeditions that started in New Spain have a lot of people from Spain, because they were the experience to travel, but also there were a lot of indigenous people, a lot of allies who go with the Spaniards, and because of that, they have a lot of migration to the islands of the West. But after the Manila, when they started the Manila galleon, the tripulations mostly were from Philippines or the area, Asiatic area, different parts, because the travel started in Philippines. So the situation changed. Most of the people of the tripulations were from the Asia islands or different areas, and some of them stop in America and stay there for different reasons. And when the Manila galleon started in Acapulco, like Guillaume said, a lot of soldiers or people who were forced to go to the Philippines also take the ship and go to the islands. But they were not. They were in those in the galleons, not like a tripulations, mostly like passengers. But mostly in the beginning, then the tripulation were a combination between Spanish and indigenous people. And after that, when the galleon started, mostly the tripulation were from Asia. I don't know if I answered your question.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. This is from our other platform. How did the Spaniards convince the regional pilots to accompany and guide them in Southeast Asian routes? Anyone could answer? Guillaume?
Well, I think we have testimonies of captured pilots. No, it was a very, very common. All the Europeans they captured local people. No, in America, I'm thinking of Drake when Drake made his world tour, where he captured a lot of Spaniards, of local pilots, and he did the same in Asia. And the Spanish and I suppose the Portuguese did the same. And it was the main way to do. And after when the relations were more regular, they paid them. No, but at the beginning they captured them.
Okay, thank you again. I'm afraid that's all that we have time for. The 2 hours flew by very quickly because of all the interesting and very, very mind-blowing new perspectives that we were presented in this panel. So once more, I would like to thank all the members of the panel for presenting and being very generous with your knowledge. Unfortunately, Professor Jorge de Matos had to leave already because he has class, so I will not keep people any longer than necessary. But please, on behalf of the Department of History, of Ateneo de Manila, the Department of Interdisciplinary Studies, and all of the sponsors, thank you very much. Before we go, allow me to just share again my screen very quickly, and just to show what some upcoming events of the conference. So tomorrow on June 26 at 7 p.m. Philippine time, so maybe that's not too early for some of you, there will be a special panel on representations of Enrique de Malacca. 4 artists: Pedro Palma, a filmmaker from Portugal; Kidlat Tahimik, a filmmaker from Baguio; Luis Francia, a playwright from New York; and Ahmad Fuad Osman, a visual artist from Kuala Lumpur. We'll talk about the inspiration, process, and reception of their works depicting Enrique de Malacca. And on Monday, the Department of History will host another panel on environment, seafaring, and shipbuilding, featuring Dr. Greg Bankoff and Dr. Ivan Valdez Bufno. We hope to see you at those events and the many others to follow. So once more, on behalf of the Department of History and the School of Humanities of Ateneo de Manila, our partners, Centro de Humanidades, Universidad Nova de Lisboa, and the National Quincentennial Commission, I thank all of you for joining us today. So have a good evening, everyone, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye to social media. What a
I will take your picture if you don't mind.
Woo!
Woohoo. 1, 2, 3.
Ah.
And one more, please. Thank you so much. We will be in touch. Thank you so much.
Bueno. Bye.
Woo, congratulations. Thank you to our
Congratulations.
speakers. That was really
It
wonderful.
was so interesting. My
Yeah.
goodness. I wish our students could listen
The
in.
videos are available.
Yes.
We'll archive them.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can use part of it for our classes.
Yeah.
If the panelists wish to do so or allow us to do so, we will write you.
Thank you so much. Thank
It's
you.
still it's still recording and streaming live.
Is
Oh,
it
no.
still streaming
No,
live?
it's not
Oh, no,
streaming
it's
live
still-
anymore.
No more. It's just recording, I think.
No, I can see your Facebook.
It's recording. Should we stop recording?
Yeah, I'll ask them to stop the live stream.
For Facebook, it's already ended.
Okay, it's ended on Facebook and on YouTube. So recording, we can.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
We're okay. We're not heard by the